London, April 1812. Miss Penelope Wrentham had long considered herself an exceptionally practical young woman. At 23, she had outlasted 3 London seasons with her heart intact and her expectations appropriately tempered. Marriage, she had determined, was merely a transaction, a necessary social contract to secure one's future prosperity and position. Love was a pleasant fiction invented by poets and perpetuated by the particularly gullible members of society. Another invitation, her younger sister Flora announced, waving a cream-coloured card embossed with gold lettering. Lady Harrington's spring ball, how utterly predictable. Penelope accepted the card with a thin smile. The same faces, the same conversations, the same desperate mammas parading their daughters before the same indifferent gentlemen. One might think London society would occasionally surprise us. "You've grown terribly cynical, Penny," Flora sighed, collapsing onto the settee in a manner their mother would certainly disapprove of. "Not every gentleman is indifferent, some are quite attentive." Attentive to dowries, perhaps. "And what of Lord Eastwick? They say he's returned to London." Penelope's fingers stilled on the invitation. "What of him?" "Only that he's the most fearsome bachelor in all of England, obscenely wealthy, impossibly handsome, and utterly, utterly cold. They say he's refused no fewer than 12 proposals of marriage." "One cannot refuse what has not been offered," Penelope corrected. "And I highly doubt 12 women have proposed to the man." "Well, their mothers have," Flora replied with a laugh. "The Duke of Eastwick inspires terror and fascination in equal measure. And now he's seeking a wife." "How convenient for him," Penelope murmured, setting the invitation aside. "Another powerful man who believes himself entitled to the best merchandise in the marriage market. I shall endeavour to stay well out of his way." Indeed, Penelope had cultivated the perfect strategy for navigating London society. She was pleasant but not effusive, pretty but not distracting, accomplished but not threatening. She participated in the social rituals with dutiful precision while harbouring no romantic delusions whatsoever. Her father had ensured she possessed a respectable dowry, which, combined with her family connections, made her an acceptable match, though hardly the season's incomparable. This arrangement suited her perfectly. She would eventually accept a proposal from a respectable gentleman with a comfortable income and a sensible disposition. They would establish a peaceful household founded on mutual respect and shared interests. Romance would not enter into the equation. "You cannot avoid him at Lady Harrington's," Flora persisted. "Everyone will be watching his every move. They say his gaze can freeze a debutante at 20 paces. "What nonsense," Penelope replied, though she couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity. "He is merely a man, Flora, a particularly wealthy and titled man, but a man nonetheless." 3 days later, Penelope discovered just how wrong she had been. The moment Lord Lachlan Eastwick entered Lady Harrington's ballroom, conversation faltered like a clock winding down. He was tall, far taller than Penelope had anticipated, with shoulders that strained against his impeccably tailored evening coat. His features were not so much handsome as they were arresting. A strong jaw, penetrating grey eyes, and dark hair that refused to submit entirely to fashion's dictates. "Good heavens," whispered Mrs. Wrentham, clutching Penelope's arm with surprising strength. "The Duke of Eastwick. He hasn't attended a ball in 3 years." "How fascinating," Penelope replied, extracting her arm from her mother's grip. "If you'll excuse me, I promised Lady Harrington I would assist with the music arrangements." "You will do no such thing," her mother hissed. "You will remain precisely where you are and look pleasantly approachable." Penelope sighed. "Mamma, surely you don't imagine the Duke of Eastwick would take any interest in—" Her words died in her throat as the crowd parted, and the Duke's gaze locked directly with hers. For one terrible moment, Penelope felt pinned in place, as though some invisible force had rooted her to the spot. The Duke's expression did not change, yet she sensed a flicker of something, curiosity perhaps, before he inclined his head slightly and continued his progress through the ballroom. "Did you see that?" Mrs. Wrentham whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "He acknowledged you, Penelope." "He nodded, Mamma, a basic courtesy extended to dozens of people every day." Yet as the evening progressed, Penelope became uncomfortably aware that the Duke's gaze returned to her with unsettling frequency. During the first set of dances, which she spent with the perfectly amiable Mr. Holloway, she felt the weight of observation. While selecting refreshments, she glimpsed his reflection in a decorative mirror, his attention unmistakably directed toward her. When Lady Harrington herself approached to introduce them, Penelope's heart betrayed her with a sudden, unwelcome acceleration. "Your Grace, may I present Miss Penelope Wrentham?" "Miss Wrentham, His Grace, the Duke of Eastwick." Penelope curtsied with practiced precision. "Your Grace." "Miss Wrentham." His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a resonance that suggested he used it sparingly. "I believe the next set is beginning. Would you care to dance?" The question hung in the air between them. Penelope became acutely aware that several nearby conversations had ceased, that numerous pairs of eyes were watching this exchange with avid interest. To refuse would be unthinkable, to accept would invite speculation. "Thank you, Your Grace, that would be pleasant." His expression did not alter, but something in his eyes sharpened. "Pleasant," he repeated, as though testing an unfamiliar word. "How remarkably measured of you, Miss Wrentham." As he led her toward the forming set, Penelope sensed the collective inhalation of the ballroom. Whispers trailed in their wake like ripples in a pond. "You've caused quite a stir, Your Grace," she observed as they took their positions. "I suspect your dance card will be quite full after this demonstration of sociability." A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of her observation. "I don't dance, Miss Wrentham. And yet here we are." "Indeed, an exception to my rule." The music began, and Penelope discovered another unexpected quality of the Duke of Eastwick. He moved with astonishing grace for a man of his size. His hand at her waist was light, his steps precise, his attention entirely focused on her in a manner that was both flattering and deeply unsettling. "You're staring, Your Grace," she said when the dance brought them together again. "Am I?" "My apologies." He did not sound remotely apologetic. "I find myself curious about you, Miss Wrentham." "There is nothing curious about me, I assure you. I am perfectly ordinary." "That," he said with unexpected intensity, "is demonstrably untrue." The dance separated them before she could respond, leaving her flustered and annoyed at her own reaction. When they came together again, she was determined to regain her composure. "You have a reputation, Your Grace." "Only one? How disappointing." "They say you're the most feared bachelor in London." "And do you fear me, Miss Wrentham?" The question, asked with such quiet directness, deserved honesty. "I find that fear is rarely a useful emotion, Your Grace, particularly in social situations." For the first time, something like genuine amusement crossed his features. A diplomatic answer. "A truthful one," she countered. "Though I confess, I do not understand why you've singled me out for this unusual honor." The dance ended before he could respond. As they left the floor, he surprised her by retaining her hand on his arm and guiding her toward the terrace doors. "Your Grace, I cannot possibly." "The doors remain open, Miss Wrentham, and we are in full view of the entire assembly," he said smoothly. "Your reputation will survive a brief conversation." Outside, the spring air carried the scent of Lady Harrington's famous roses. Penelope noticed that several matrons had positioned themselves with perfect views of the terrace, their fans fluttering with barely contained excitement. "You've made me the object of considerable speculation," she said, irritation finally breaking through her careful composure. "I cannot imagine what you hope to accomplish." Lord Eastwick regarded her with that same inscrutable expression. "You intrigue me, Miss Wrentham." "Nonsense. You are the only woman in that ballroom who looked utterly disinterested when I entered." Penelope blinked. "That's absurd." "It's refreshing." Every other young lady adopted an expression of calculated allure or wide-eyed admiration. You looked annoyed. Despite herself, Penelope felt her lips twitch. "Perhaps I was simply contemplating the deplorable state of the refreshment table. Lady Harrington's lemonade is notoriously weak." He laughed then, a rich, unexpected sound that transformed his severe features and sent a peculiar shiver down Penelope's spine. There, he said, his voice warming. That's what I suspected existed beneath all that careful propriety. A woman with actual thoughts and observations, rather than a collection of practiced responses. For a moment, Penelope found herself strangely speechless. Then she gathered her composure. You know nothing about me, Your Grace. I intend to remedy that. With your permission, I shall call on you tomorrow. That would be, she stopped, caught between social convention and honesty. Most unexpected, but not unwelcome. His gaze held hers, surprisingly intent. I suppose we shall discover that tomorrow, she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. When Penelope returned home that night, she attempted to dismiss the encounter as a bizarre aberration. Surely the Duke had been momentarily diverted, and tomorrow would bring a return to normalcy. Yet when his grand carriage appeared outside the Wrentham residence precisely at the acceptable hour for morning calls, she found her heart performing the most undignified somersaults. His Grace, the Duke of Eastwick, announced their butler, looking as astonished as if he'd just introduced the king himself. The Duke entered their modest drawing-room with the same commanding presence he'd displayed at the ball, though today his attire was marginally less formal. Mrs. Wrentham nearly collapsed with delight, while Flora gaped openly. Your Grace, what an unexpected honor, Mrs. Wrentham gushed, curtsying so deeply Penelope feared for her mother's aging knees. Mrs. Wrentham, Miss Wrentham. He bowed to each in turn, though his gaze lingered on Penelope. Miss Flora, I hope I find you all well this morning. Exceedingly well, Your Grace, Mrs. Wrentham simpered. Please, won't you sit? Flora, ring for tea, the best service, mind you, and those small cakes from Gunter's. Penelope watched this performance with mingled embarrassment and resignation. You've caused quite a stir in our household, Your Grace. An unavoidable consequence of my presence, it seems, he replied, settling himself into a chair that suddenly appeared too small for his frame. What followed was 30 minutes of the most peculiar conversation Penelope had ever experienced. The Duke asked her direct questions about her interests and opinions, listened intently to her answers, and responded with thoughtful observations of his own. He was neither flirtatious nor falsely charming. Indeed, his manner remained somewhat reserved. Yet there was an unmistakable focus to his attention that made her feel as though every word she uttered was being carefully considered. As he prepared to depart, he addressed her directly. Would you do me the honor of joining me for a drive in the park tomorrow, Miss Wrentham? With your mother as chaperone, of course. Oh, how delightful, Mrs. Wrentham exclaimed before Penelope could respond. We would be most honored, Your Grace. Until tomorrow, then, he said, bowing over Penelope's hand. For the briefest moment, his fingers tightened around hers, and she felt an inexplicable warmth spread up her arm. The moment the front door closed behind him, chaos erupted in the Wrentham household. A duke, a drive in the park. Penelope, do you realize what this means? Mrs. Wrentham was practically dancing around the drawing room. It means we're going for a drive, Penelope replied carefully. It means you've caught the interest of the most eligible bachelor in England. We must send for the modiste immediately. Your blue walking dress is at least a season old. Mamma, please. It's a drive in the park, not a royal presentation. But her protestations fell on deaf ears. By evening, the entire neighborhood knew that Miss Penelope Wrentham had somehow attracted the attention of the formidable Duke of Eastwick. By the following morning, callers began appearing with transparent excuses to gather information. Lady Winterbourne, how unexpected, Penelope greeted their third visitor of the morning. I was merely passing and thought to inquire after your mother's health, the elderly lady replied, though her shrewd eyes belied her casual tone. Such a trying season for those with delicate constitutions. Mamma is in excellent health, thank you. She's currently selecting her bonnet for our drive in the park. Lady Winterbourne's eyebrows shot up. Indeed, I had heard rumors of a certain gentleman's interest, but one never knows what to believe. I find belief best reserved for matters of actual consequence, Penelope replied with a placid smile. My dear, Lady Winterbourne leaned forward, lowering her voice, a duke's interest is of the highest consequence. Especially this duke. You speak as though he's some mythical creature, rather than a man. Lord Eastwick is not just any man, His influence extends far beyond his title, and his temperament is formidable. They say his last betrothal ended when he discovered his intended had spoken falsely about her accomplishments. He broke the engagement with such finality that the poor girl was forced to retire to the country indefinitely. Penelope frowned. Surely that's exaggerated. Perhaps, but consider this a friendly warning, my dear. The Duke of Eastwick values honesty above all else, an unusual quality in our society, you must admit. If he's taken an interest in you, I can only assume he sees something genuine where others present mere facades. After Lady Winterbourne departed, Penelope found herself unusually thoughtful. Why had the Duke singled her out? She was neither the most beautiful nor the most accomplished young woman of the season. Her dowry, while respectable, was hardly noteworthy to a man of his fortune. She had been perfectly pleasant during their dance, but no more so than she would have been with any gentleman. Unless, could it be that her very lack of calculated interest had somehow attracted his attention? The thought was so absurd that she dismissed it immediately. Yet when his magnificent carriage arrived that afternoon, she found herself unusually concerned with his impression of her. "Your Grace," she curtsied as he handed her into the carriage, followed by her mother. "Thank you for the invitation." "Miss Wrentham, Mrs. Wrentham." He settled opposite them, his tall frame making the spacious carriage seem suddenly intimate. "I thought perhaps we might drive through Hyde Park before the main promenade hour begins. The spring blooms are particularly fine this year." "How delightful," Mrs. Wrentham enthused. "The weather is indeed perfect for admiring nature's bounty." As the carriage proceeded, Mrs. Wrentham maintained a steady stream of pleasant observations, interspersed with thinly veiled allusions to Penelope's many virtues. The Duke responded with perfect courtesy, though his gaze frequently returned to Penelope's face with an intensity that made her uncharacteristically self-conscious. When they reached a particularly beautiful avenue of flowering trees, he suggested they might walk for a short while. Mrs. Wrentham, suddenly claiming fatigue, insisted on remaining in the carriage, just a few steps behind you, of course. Finding herself strolling beside the Duke, with only the discreet presence of his footmen as chaperons, Penelope gathered her courage. "May I speak plainly, Your Grace? I would expect nothing less from you, Miss Wrentham. I confess I do not understand your interest in me. There are dozens of young ladies in London more suitable for your attention." He was silent for several paces, his expression thoughtful. "Have you considered that perhaps it is precisely your lack of calculated suitability that I find appealing?" "That makes very little sense, Your Grace." "On the contrary, I have spent years observing the machinations of society, Miss Wrentham. Young women trained from birth to capture advantageous marriages, families plotting alliances as though preparing for war. Smiles that never reach the eyes, compliments empty of genuine feeling." He paused. "And then there is you. I assure you, I am as much a product of society as any other young lady. Yet you do not simper. You do not contrive to showcase accomplishments you do not possess. When I asked your opinion on contemporary literature, you admitted you prefer history. When I inquired about your musical preferences, you confessed a fondness for folk melodies rather than claiming devotion to whatever Italian composer is currently fashionable." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. Those were hardly revolutionary admissions. In a world of careful calculation, honesty is indeed revolutionary. He turned to face her, his expression suddenly intense. "Tell me something true, Miss Wrentham. Something you would not normally share in polite conversation." The request was so unexpected that Penelope found herself answering before she could consider the wisdom of doing so. "I do not believe in romantic love." His eyebrows rose. "Indeed, and yet you read novels in which it features prominently. How did you?" The volume of Austen tucked beside your embroidery frame. Hardly the choice of someone entirely cynical about romantic attachments. "I enjoy the author's observations of social folly," she replied, somewhat defensively. "But I recognize the central premise as fictional. Marriage is a practical arrangement for securing one's future and position. Pretending otherwise seems foolish. And yet people do marry for love." People also believe in ghosts and fairies. That doesn't make them real. His laugh was unexpected, a deep, genuine sound that transformed his severe features. You are truly unique, Miss Wrentham. I am entirely ordinary, Your Grace. My views are simply more practical than poetic. Then allow me to offer a proposition equally practical. I should like to court you. Penelope stopped abruptly, certain she had misheard. I beg your pardon. I wish to court you formally, with the intention of determining whether we might suit as husband and wife. Her heart performed a most alarming series of acrobatics before she managed to find her voice. That is the least romantic proposal I have ever heard. I thought romance was not your concern, he replied, his eyes glinting with something that might have been amusement. It isn't, but surely even practical arrangements deserve some consideration beyond mere declaration. Very well, he gestured toward a bench positioned beneath a flowering cherry tree. Shall we discuss the practical merits of such an arrangement? Feeling as though she had somehow lost control of the situation, Penelope allowed him to guide her to the bench. They sat at a proper distance, though she was acutely aware of his presence beside her. You require a wife, she said, striving for a businesslike tone. I understand that your position demands it. But surely there are more suitable candidates, daughters of earls, ladies with substantial dowries and impeccable lineages. I have met 27 such ladies over the past 3 seasons. None of them interested me beyond the most superficial level. And I do, she couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. You speak your mind, you possess intelligence without arrogance and confidence without vanity. You do not pretend to be what you are not, he paused. These qualities are far rarer than beauty or accomplishments and infinitely more valuable to me. Penelope found herself momentarily speechless, her carefully constructed worldview wavering under the weight of his direct gaze. You hardly know me. Which is precisely why I propose a courtship, not an immediate betrothal. We shall become acquainted properly, and then determine if a match would be agreeable to both parties. A business negotiation, then. Something flickered in his eyes, a brief shadow she couldn't interpret. If that is how you wish to view it. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. A fashionable curricle pulled by a matched pair of greys slowed as it passed, its occupant, a gentleman Penelope recognized as Lord Hathaway, staring openly at them before continuing on. It seems our conversation has been observed, the Duke noted dryly. By tomorrow, rumors of our attachment will be circulating throughout London. All the more reason to reconsider this impulsive suggestion, Penelope replied, rising from the bench. I have no desire to be the subject of society's speculation. Too late, I'm afraid. He stood beside her, offering his arm. The moment I singled you out at Lady Harrington's ball, speculation became inevitable. The only question now is whether we shall confirm or disappoint society's expectations. As they returned to the carriage where her mother waited with barely concealed excitement, Penelope felt a curious sensation, as though she stood at the edge of a precipice, with the ground crumbling beneath her feet. I shall need time to consider, she said finally as he handed her into the carriage. Of course, he bowed over her hand. I shall call tomorrow for your answer. True to his word, the Duke of Eastwick appeared at the Wrentham residence the following afternoon. By then, Penelope had endured countless visitors, an endless barrage of questions from her mother and sister, and her own internal debate that had kept her awake well into the night. When they were granted a few moments of relative privacy in the drawing room, her mother and sister hovering just beyond the doorway, Penelope delivered her carefully prepared response. I accept your proposal of courtship, Your Grace, with 2 conditions. His eyebrows rose slightly. Conditions. First, we must agree that either party may withdraw without explanation or obligation, should the arrangement prove unsuitable. Reasonable. And the second, we must be honest with one another always, no false pretenses, no polite fictions. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. Miss Wrentham, I can think of no condition that would please me more. The following weeks transformed Penelope's previously orderly life into something unrecognizable. The Duke of Eastwick courted her with a quiet intensity that both unsettled and intrigued her. There were drives in the park, attendance at the theatre, dinners where she was seated beside him, and balls where he claimed multiple dances. Society watched their courtship with avid fascination. Ladies who had previously overlooked Penelope suddenly sought her company. Gentlemen who had danced with her out of mere politeness now engaged her in eager conversation. Through it all, she maintained her composure, even as she struggled to understand the strange alchemy occurring within her own heart. "He watches you constantly," Flora observed during Lady Meredith's musical evening. Not in the way other gentlemen watch ladies, as though appraising a horse at auction, but as if he's trying to solve a particularly complex puzzle. "Perhaps he's wondering how he came to court someone so entirely ordinary," Penelope replied, though without her usual conviction. For the truth was, in the Duke's company, she felt anything but ordinary. He listened to her opinions with genuine interest. He challenged her views without dismissing them. He remembered details from their conversations that even she had forgotten. Most disconcertingly, he appeared to actually enjoy her company, seeking her out at social gatherings with single-minded determination. Their conversations ranged widely, from literature to politics, from childhood memories to philosophical questions. With each exchange, Penelope felt her carefully constructed worldview trembling at its foundations. "You truly believe marriage can never be more than a practical arrangement?" he asked her one evening as they strolled through Lady Meredith's conservatory, a discreet footman trailing behind them. "I believe expecting more invites disappointment," she replied carefully. "Better to approach it sensibly than to chase illusions." "And yet you admit your parents shared genuine affection." "They were fortunate, but one cannot build a life on the hope of good fortune." He was silent for a moment, studying a particularly exotic orchid. "I wonder, Miss Wrentham, if your practical view might be a shield rather than a conviction." "I beg your pardon." "A protection against disappointment. If one expects nothing beyond the practical, one cannot be hurt by its absence." The observation struck uncomfortably close to truths Penelope had never fully articulated, even to herself. "You presume a great deal, Your Grace." "Lachlan." "What?" "My name is Lachlan. We have known each other for nearly a month now. Perhaps in private conversation you might use it." The simple request seemed strangely intimate. "That would be most improper," says society, he replied, his voice softening. "But I believe we agreed to honesty between us, and honestly, Penelope, I should like to hear my name on your lips." The use of her given name sent a shiver of awareness through her that no amount of practical thinking could suppress. Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of another couple, forcing them to return to the ballroom and more conventional conversation. That night, alone in her bedchamber, Penelope confronted an uncomfortable truth. She was developing feelings for the Duke, for Lachlan, that transcended practical consideration. His intelligence challenged her. His rare smiles delighted her. His presence made her more aware of herself as a woman than she had ever been before. "This is precisely what you wish to avoid," she told her reflection sternly. "Foolish, romantic notions that can only end in disappointment." Yet the following day, when his carriage arrived for their planned excursion to an exhibition at the Royal Academy, her heart leapt at the sight of him. As he handed her in, his fingers lingered against hers a moment longer than propriety dictated. "You look lovely," he said quietly, his grey eyes warming as they took in her new walking dress, a purchase her mother had insisted upon despite Penelope's protests about unnecessary expense. "Thank you. The exhibition promises to be most educational," she replied, retreating to safe conversation. But as they strolled through the gallery, discussing the merits of various paintings, Penelope found herself increasingly aware of the man beside her rather than the art before her. The breadth of his shoulders beneath his perfectly tailored coat, the way his voice deepened when he spoke of things that interested him, the occasional brush of his hand against hers as they moved from one exhibit to the next. At one point, finding themselves momentarily separated from her mother and the other patrons, he spoke in a low voice meant only for her. I find I am less interested in these paintings than in watching your expressions as you view them. My expressions cannot possibly be so fascinating, she protested, though pleasure warmed her cheeks. You have a tell, you know. When you're truly impressed by something, your left eyebrow rises just slightly. He demonstrated the motion. But when you're merely being polite, your smile doesn't reach your eyes. You're very observant. Only of things that matter to me. The simple statement, delivered without embellishment, affected Penelope more deeply than any flowery declaration might have. She looked away, struggling to maintain her composure. "Forgive me," he said after a moment. "I've made you uncomfortable." "No, that is." She gathered her courage and met his gaze directly. "I'm unaccustomed to being noticed so." "Thoroughly. Then others have been remarkably unobservant." The remainder of their excursion passed in a blur of heightened awareness. That evening, Penelope found herself unable to dismiss their conversation as mere pleasantries. The Duke, Lachlan, was not merely courting her, he was seeing her in a way no one else ever had. The realization was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. 2 days later, Penelope's carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. She was selecting ribbons at a fashionable shop on Bond Street when she overheard a conversation that froze her in place. "The Duke of Eastwick and that Wrentham girl," a woman's voice said from the other side of a display. "Can you imagine? After he refused the hand of Lady Caroline Blackwell. Perhaps he tired of beauty without substance," another voice replied, "though I cannot fathom what he sees in her. She's pleasant enough, I suppose, but hardly Duchess material." "My dear, have you not heard? It's a wager. Lord Hathaway challenged him to court the most ordinary girl of the season and make her fall in love with him. £20,000, they say. Surely not even Eastwick would be so cruel. Men and their pride. I've heard he never refuses a challenge. But to toy with a young woman's affections. Oh, she'll emerge better for it. A few weeks of a duke's attention, and she'll make a perfectly respectable match afterward. Some second son or country baronet will be delighted to claim a woman who caught Eastwick's eye, however temporarily." The conversation moved on as the ladies drifted to another part of the shop, but Penelope remained frozen, the blue ribbon she had been examining clutched in her suddenly bloodless fingers. A wager, a cruel game, her greatest fear realized in the most humiliating possible manner. Somehow, she completed her purchase and made her way to where her mother waited in the carriage. Somehow, she maintained her composure during the journey home, but once in the privacy of her chamber, the careful walls she had built around her heart crumbled. A fool. She had been a complete and utter fool. She had allowed herself to believe that a man like the Duke of Eastwick might genuinely value her company, might see beyond her ordinary appearance and modest dowry to the person beneath. Worse, she had begun to feel for him, to imagine a future where her practical views on marriage might accommodate something more. By evening, her initial shock had hardened into cold determination. When the Duke's invitation arrived for the Pembrokes ball the following night, she instructed the servant to inform His Grace that Miss Wrentham was indisposed. Indisposed. "But Penelope, you cannot refuse the Duke," her mother exclaimed when she learned of it. "Think of the scandal." "I believe His Grace will survive the disappointment," Penelope replied with a calm she did not feel. "But why? Has he offended you in some way?" "I simply require some time to consider whether this courtship is progressing as I would wish." Her mother's protests continued, but Penelope remained firm. She would not allow herself to be the object of a wager, no matter how distinguished the gentleman involved. Her heart might be bruised, but her dignity would remain intact. The following morning brought not merely an inquiry after her health, but the Duke himself, his expression grave as he was shown into the drawing-room. "Miss Wrentham, I was concerned when I heard you were unwell." Penelope rose and curtsied with perfect composure. "Your Grace, as you can see, my health is quite restored." "Yet you declined to accompany me to the Pembrokes ball." "I did." He studied her face, his own expression unreadable. "May I ask why?" She had prepared for this moment, had rehearsed a dozen polite evasions, yet faced with his direct gaze, only the truth would serve. "I overheard an interesting conversation yesterday, Your Grace." concerning a wager between yourself and Lord Hathaway." His expression did not change, but she noted the sudden tension in his shoulders. "I see. £20,000 is a considerable sum, even for a duke. I congratulate you on your investment. I'm sure my complete mortification will provide excellent value for the money." "Penelope." "Miss Wrentham, if you please," she interrupted, her voice cool despite the pain lancing through her. "We are no longer on such familiar terms." "Very well, Miss Wrentham." He straightened, his expression hardening. "You believe I have been courting you as part of a wager." "I do not merely believe it. I heard it confirmed by those who claim to know the particulars. And naturally, you assumed the worst of me without seeking clarification." His tone, more disappointed than angry, sent a flicker of doubt through her resolve. What possible clarification could justify such behavior? "The truth, perhaps." "By all means, enlighten me." He paced the length of the drawing room before turning to face her again. "Lord Hathaway did indeed propose a wager during a particularly unpleasant evening at White's. He suggested that my reputation for coldness must stem from an inability to inspire genuine affection, that any interest shown me was motivated solely by my title and fortune." "A common enough circumstance for men of your position," Penelope observed, fighting to maintain her composure. "Indeed, but Hathaway's particular challenge was that I could not win the genuine regard of a woman who valued honesty over advantage. He claimed all women were ultimately motivated by ambition, and that I would never find one who valued me for myself rather than my position." Penelope frowned. "And so you selected me as your experiment?" "No," his voice softened. "I had already noticed you at Lady Harrington's ball. Your obvious disinterest in the usual social machinations intrigued me. When Hathaway made his wager, I saw an opportunity to pursue my interest in you while proving a point about genuine connection." "You might have mentioned this wager when proposing to court me," she said, though her indignation was wavering. "Perhaps, but would you have believed my interest was genuine if I had? Or would you have assumed I selected you specifically for the wager?" The question struck uncomfortably close to the truth. "So instead, you said nothing and allowed me to discover it through gossip and speculation." "A mistake," he admitted, his expression grave. "One I deeply regret." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Penelope spoke. "Even if what you say is true, this courtship has been built on a foundation of partial truths. We agreed to honesty between us." "We did, and I have been honest in every way that matters." He moved closer, his gaze intent. "My interest in you is genuine, Penelope. It has nothing to do with wagers or societal expectations. I admire your intelligence, your directness, your refusal to pretend to be what you are not." "Pretty words," she murmured, though her heart betrayed her with its quickened pace. "Not pretty." "True." He took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm despite her best efforts at indifference. "I should have told you about the wager. I should have trusted that you would understand my motives. That was my mistake, and I ask your forgiveness." Penelope looked down at their joined hands, struggling with emotions she had long denied. "I need time to consider." "Of course," he released her hand reluctantly, "but know this. Wager or no wager, my feelings for you are entirely real. More real than anything I have experienced before." After he departed, Penelope found herself in a state of uncharacteristic indecision. She had built her worldview on the certainty that romantic attachment was a foolish risk, that practical considerations should guide one's choices in matters of the heart. Yet the pain she felt at the thought of severing her connection with the Duke suggested her heart had already made choices her mind had not approved. For 3 days, she declined all invitations and visitors, pleading a lingering headache. On the 4th day, a package arrived containing a first edition of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility, and a simple note, "Perhaps there is wisdom in both." That evening, as Penelope sat reading the novel, a passage caught her attention. "It is not time or opportunity that is to determine intimacy, it is disposition alone. 7 years would be insufficient to make some people acquainted with each other, and 7 days are more than enough for others. In 6 weeks of courtship, the Duke of Eastwick, Lachlan, had come to know her better than those who had been acquainted with her for years. He had seen past the careful facade she presented to the world and valued what he found beneath. Could she dismiss such recognition based on pride alone? The following morning, she wrote a brief note. Hyde Park, the cherry trees, 11 o'clock. He was waiting when she arrived, her maid following at a discreet distance. For a moment, they simply regarded one another, the spring breeze stirring the flowering branches above them. "You came," he said finally, relief evident in his voice. "I did. Does this mean you've forgiven me?" Penelope considered her words carefully. "I believe I understand your motives, even if I cannot fully approve your methods." A fair assessment. He gestured toward the bench where they had sat weeks before. "May we speak privately?" Once seated, Penelope gathered her courage. "I have spent these past days examining my own beliefs as much as your actions. I have long prided myself on my practical approach to marriage and attachment. Yet I find my feelings for you are anything but practical." His expression softened. "Is that so terrible a discovery?" "It is unsettling. To realize one's carefully constructed worldview may be based on fear rather than wisdom. Fear of disappointment, of vulnerability." She met his gaze directly. "Of caring for someone who may not care equally in return." "Penelope," he took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I began this courtship out of interest and curiosity. I continue it because I have found in you something I never expected to find, a woman who sees me as a man, not merely a title. A companion whose mind challenges and delights me, a person whose happiness has become essential to my own." "That sounds remarkably like a romantic declaration from a man courting a practical arrangement," she observed, though she could not prevent the warmth blooming in her chest. "Perhaps we were both wrong in our initial assessment. Perhaps there is room for both practicality and feeling in a true partnership." He hesitated, then continued with unusual hesitancy. "I had planned to wait longer before asking this, but recent events have made me unwilling to risk further misunderstanding. Penelope Wrentham, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The question hung between them, momentous and transforming. Penelope looked into his eyes and saw not calculation or amusement, but genuine vulnerability, the same vulnerability she had so long feared in herself. "Before I answer," she said carefully, "I must know. What of the wager?" "I informed Lord Hathaway yesterday that I was withdrawing from our agreement, as I found the very premise insulting to the woman I hope to marry." "And the £20,000? A small price to pay for my own foolishness." Penelope considered this. "You know, Your Grace, Lachlan, I believe I may have a better solution." 2 weeks later, London society gathered for what was rumoured to be the engagement ball of the season. When the Duke of Eastwick entered Lady Montrose's ballroom with Miss Penelope Wrentham on his arm, the collective intake of breath was audible. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that transformed her from merely pretty to genuinely striking, but it was the evident affection between the couple that drew the most attention. Midway through the evening, after they had completed the opening dance, the Duke escorted Penelope to where Lord Hathaway stood observing the proceedings with evident discomfort. "Hathaway," the Duke greeted him with cool politeness. "I believe you owe Miss Wrentham an apology." Lord Hathaway's face paled. "Your Grace, I never intended." "Nevertheless," Penelope interrupted gently, "your wager has caused considerable distress, not to mention speculation, throughout London society. Miss Wrentham, I assure you." "Fortunately," she continued, "His Grace and I have devised a solution that may satisfy all parties." She glanced at Lachlan, who nodded encouragingly. "The £20,000 you wagered will be donated to the Foundling Hospital in the name of the future Duchess of Eastwick. A fitting celebration of our engagement, don't you think?" Lord Hathaway's jaw dropped. "Engagement?" "Indeed," the Duke confirmed, his hand covering Penelope's on his arm. "Miss Wrentham has done me the honour of accepting my proposal. An announcement will be made shortly." "But the wager is concluded," Penelope said firmly. "Though not perhaps as you anticipated. You wagered that his grace could not win the genuine affection of a woman valuing honesty over advantage. As I understand it, my acceptance of his proposal suggests you have lost. Lord Hathaway's expression shifted from confusion to grudging respect. It appears I underestimated you both. A common error, the Duke replied, the corner of his mouth lifting in a slight smile. One I trust you won't repeat. As they moved away, Penelope squeezed Lachlan's arm. That was rather satisfying. You were magnificent, he murmured, his eyes warm with admiration. I believe half the ballroom is currently revising their opinion of my future Duchess. Let them revise. I find I care far less for society's opinion than I once did. Another practical belief abandoned. Modified, perhaps, she smiled up at him. I'm discovering that practicality and passion need not be mutually exclusive. Later that evening, after the formal announcement of their engagement had been met with enthusiastic congratulations, they found a moment of relative privacy on Lady Montrose's terrace. Happy? Lachlan asked, his fingers intertwining with hers. Unexpectedly so, Penelope admitted, though I still maintain marriage is a practical arrangement. Of course, his eyes gleamed with amusement. Merely enhanced by mutual respect, intellectual compatibility, and, she prompted when he paused. In answer, he drew her slightly deeper into the shadows and brushed his lips against hers in the lightest of kisses. When he pulled back, his expression was tender yet questioning. I believe, Penelope said softly, her heart racing, that particular element may require further investigation. His low laugh warmed her more thoroughly than the finest shawl. I am, as always, at your service, my practical Duchess. As they returned to the ballroom, Penelope caught the envious glances of several young ladies who had previously dismissed her as unremarkable. She understood their feelings entirely. After all, she had defied the most feared duke in London, and won not merely his hand, but his heart, an outcome that even her formerly practical self had to admit was nothing short of extraordinary.